Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So now that our Stanley Cup final matchup is set, Edmonton versus Florida, two fantastic teams, two top five teams, arguably top three. And I mean, they're the only two teams remaining. That's all that matters at the end of the day. But a worthy Stanley Cup finals. So I thought on Tier List Tuesday, we'd look at every single Stanley Cup champion of the 21st century, going from the year 2000 and working all the way up till most recently the 2023 Vegas Golden Knights, and tier listing them. Now, when looking at this, they're all fantastic teams. This is a tough tier list to make because even the teams that are going to be in the bottom tier are still very good. It's not like we've ever had like the 2021 Montreal Canadiens somehow won the Stanley Cup that year. That would be maybe a bad team winning it, although they would be worthy champions. But these are all very good teams. We're going to look at the tier list now. All-time teams. These are arguably probably going to be like the top 5 to 10 greatest teams of all time, period. Great squad, loaded throughout, bunch of Hall of Famers. Very good. 105, 110 point team that kind of worked their way through the Stanley Cup playoffs, and then good and got hot. These are still good teams, but maybe not the most impressive regular seasons, not a ton. Maybe one area of weakness in terms of their team, not the most complete team, but they won the Stanley Cup. Again, all these teams are fantastic. I'm not trying to shit on any of these teams. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's break it down. Up first, the 2008 Red Wings. I am going to go with a great squad. When looking at it, Lindstrom was still playing at a high level. Yes, he maybe wasn't early 2000s Lindstrom, but he was still a top 3 defenseman in the entire NHL. You got Datsuk and Zetterberg. This was them really in their prime. The 2002 team that you see down there that we're going to get to, they weren't quite there yet, but this was fully their team. Detroit, I believe they were like a 115-point team this year. Chris Osgood in net. Fantastic team. You can make an argument for all time. They would probably be the team that you're going to see that I would eventually put in all time if I had to move one up. Great team. Great squad. Not the best Red Wings squad, but a great squad. 2000 Devils. I'm going to go very good. Again, Devils, not the most high-flying offensive team with their 3 Stanley Cups, but so fundamentally sound defensively. Scott Niedermayer, Scott Stevens, Marty Brodeur in net, obviously fantastic defensively, will lock you up. Maybe didn't have the offensive firepower. They did have Scott Gomez, Patrick Elias, but still a very good team. They were safely a playoff team that year and ran through it in 2000. Next up, Rod Brind'Amour in the 2006 Carolina Hurricanes. The first team that I'm going to put good and got hot. Yes, they were a 106-point team during the regular season. They won their division, but this was a team, Carolina was not this consistent playoff team. I believe they missed the year before and the year after. It was just like everything went right for them this season. Eric Stahl was fantastic, 45 goals, 55 assists. Brind'Amour was still at a very high level. Rookie Cam Ward came onto the scene and was fantastic, won the Conn Smythe. Didn't really have exactly a number one elite defenseman. That's maybe the weakness of this team, but still very good. Very worthy Stanley Cup champion, but when we're comparing them to the 23 Stanley Cup champions, they are kind of on the lower end looking at that. 2009 Penguins. This might surprise people, but I'm also going to go with good and got hot. They beat a very good Red Wing squad. It was most of the same Red Wing squad on top of them having Marian Hossa. But when you do look at this Pittsburgh squad, it really was Crosby, Malkin. They had Sergei Gonchar. They did have a young Chris Letang, but when looking at them, it was Crosby and Malkin just took over in these playoffs. They went on another level. It's similar to a Draisaitl and McDavid, but on a whole nother level. Look at it in their playoff scoring. Their third highest scorer in the playoffs had 15 points. Crosby had 31. Malkin had 34. This was a two-man fantastic carry. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins 2016 and 2017 teams were better. We're going to get to them, or at least on the same level. The 2009 Pittsburgh Penguins, just one near generational player, just on another level, dismantling the entire NHL. Speaking of which, this is the 2017 Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm gonna go for them. I'm gonna go good and got hot as well. They were a 112-point team. Not as I'm gonna have the 2016 team above these guys, but they were very solid. Chris Letang more so in his prime. Crosby and Malkin still top 10. The best player in the entire world for Crosby, and still Malkin was a top 10 guy in the entire NHL. They had the pieces like a Phil Kessel. Matt Murray carried in the playoffs at times. They were a very good team and ended up getting hot to go back-to-back. 2002 Red Wings. This is our first all-time great team. I do think they are slightly overrated in terms of being the greatest team of all time. I don't know if I would agree with that sentiment, but when you look at the names on this team, guys like Brett Hull, Luc Robitaille, that joined Dominic Hasek, although those guys maybe weren't in their prime, they were loaded on top of having Steve Yzerman, Nick Lidstrom. They were in terms of name talent, if there was a team, if you had everybody in their prime, they'd be the greatest team of all time. And even in that 2002 season, they were fantastic. Definitely an all-time team no doubt in my opinion. The 2010 Chicago Blackhawks, I'm going to go with great squad, the first of their Stanley Cups. They were a 110-point team during the regular season, and they had the core pieces, obviously Keith, Kane, and Toews. Kane and Toews maybe weren't in the primes of their career yet, but they had so much goddamn depth on this team. Guys like Andrew Ladd, who eventually left the team a couple of years after. Brian Campbell was still on the team. Dustin Byfuglien was still on the team. This team was absolutely loaded, and it really just came together for their first Stanley Cup. The 2013 Chicago Blackhawks, this is an all-time team, though. They had 77 points in 48 games during the regular season. This was prime Kane. This was prime Toews, prime Keith. 3 genuine top 10 players in the entire NHL cooking at a high level. Corey Crawford, still very good. Patrick Sharp, Brett Seabrook. They were a wagon. They were one of the greatest teams of all time. I think they were on like a 132-point pace, but it was the lockout shortened season. They were fantastic. Definitely an all-time team. 2020, this is the 2020 Tampa Bay Lightning. 2020 Tampa Bay Lightning, I'm going to put in good. They were a very good team. They had 92 points in 70 games before the COVID shutdown. I think the following year they were better. This was still a very good team. Really no flaws when looking at it. You got Victor Hedman as your superstar best defenseman in the league. Sergachev and McDonough still fantastic number 2s and number 3s on your goddamn team. Superstars in terms of forwards. Kucherov, they didn't have Stamkos in the playoffs this year, but Kucherov, Point, Palat, they had that fantastic third line of Yanni Gourde, Barclay Goodrow, and Blake Coleman. That was one of the best third lines I've ever seen in my entire life. On top of Vasilevsky and net, a very, very good team and a worthy cup champ, not COVID cup champs. They were well deserving. The 2015 Chicago Blackhawks, I'm going to go good and got hot. This was kind of towards the end of the dynasty. Obviously, it was their last Stanley Cup. They were only a 102-point team during the regular season. Still very good, but guys like Duncan Keith, Seabrook were kind of on the back nine of their career. They were no longer the top elite guys that we know. Patrick Sharp, Kane, and Toews were still fantastic, but this definitely is the weakest of the Chicago Blackhawks Stanley Cup wins. I don't think that's controversial in the slightest. Devils, 2003. I'm going to go yet again with a very good score. It was mostly the same team as the 2000 squad. Fantastic defensively, really sound. Nothing special offensively, but defensively, one of the greatest teams that we've ever seen. The 2004 Tampa Bay Lightning, I'm going to go good and got hot as well. A very, very good squad. The forward core was very good on this team. Brad Richards, Vincent Lecavalier, Marty St. Louis. The defense core didn't really have exactly a fantastic number 1 or a legit top 5 goalie in the entire NHL. So that kind of holds them back, in my opinion. Still a worthy Stanley Cup champ. Safely made the playoffs this year and one of the most electric offensive Stanley Cup winners. But I don't really have them in that top tier. I put too many of these goddamn very good and got hot at the start. Anaheim Ducks in 2007. I'm going to go with the great squad. When looking at their top 2 defensemen, Scott Niedermayer and Chris Pronger, one of the best two-headed monsters in terms of the defense score in NHL history. Timo Solani was still that superstar forward, on top of having the likes of a young Corey Perry, Ryan Getzlaf, who were still high-level players. This was a very good team. I believe they had like 110, 112 points during the regular season. They were a great squad, in my opinion. Next up, the Boston Bruins in 2011. I think this is a great squad as well. When looking at them, Tim Thomas, 2-time Vezina Trophy winner. I believe he won the Conn Smythe that year. I could be wrong. Zdeno Chara, though, legit number 1 defenseman. Bergeron entering his prime then. They had an older Mark Recchi. Brad Marchand was coming into his own back then. A bunch of very good pieces. They were a very deep team. Fantastic. Boston Bruins beat the Vancouver Canucks in 7 games, as we know. The 2014 LA Kings, I am going to go with a very good squad. This team, the 2012 team, just barely sneaked into the playoffs. They did have some injuries. This team was safely a playoff team. Best defensive team in the entire league by a decent margin. I believe they allowed like 192 goals this season, which is like 2.2, 2.3 a game. Jonathan Quick at the peak of his powers. Kopitar and Doughty in their primes. A very good team. Next up, the 2012 team. It's tough because they did deal with the regular season injuries, but they rolled through the playoffs. I think I am going to go with a very good team just because they went 16-4 in the goddamn playoffs. So even though they were an 8 seed, they wrecked teams nonstop. So for that, I'm going to go with very good. 2016 Penguins, I'm going to go a very good team for the 2016 Penguins. Once they fired Dan Bylsma, or I believe, yeah, there was Dan Bylsma, and then hired Mike Sullivan, they were pretty easily the best team in the entire NHL, buzzsawed through the playoffs. This was probably the best version of the Pittsburgh Penguins that we have ever seen. Again, these teams are still very good, but not quite to the same level of the Mike Sullivan 2016 team. Washington Capitals in 2018. The weird thing about this team is the prior 3 seasons they won the President's Trophy, or maybe the prior 2 seasons. This was the year they were still a 105-point team. I'm gonna go with this is tough. I'm going to go with good and got hot. I'm not going to lie, because this team was not really expected to do that much. Still a very good team. They did beat a very good Tampa Bay team in the Eastern Conference Finals. Maybe got a little bit lucky playing Vegas, even though Vegas was very good that year in the Stanley Cup Finals. I'm going to go very good. No, this team really didn't have any flaws. They had the superstar forward. They had a legit number one center. They had a legit number one defenseman. They had one of the best goalies in the entire league at that time. I got to go with very good for the Washington Capitals. 2019 Blues, this is going to piss some people off because similarly to the 2016 Penguins, once they hired Berube, they were fantastic, but I still think when you look at the all-time rankings, this team is a little bit lackluster, don't really have that superstar talent that the 2016 Pittsburgh Penguins have. Jordan Binnington went on a just generational run, so I'm going to put them in good and got very hot. They were very good, don't get me wrong, but they were very good and got hot. Next up, Tampa Bay Lightning in 2021. I think that this is a great squad. This is when they had 77 points in 56 games during the COVID season without Nikita Kucherov, traded a bunch at the assets, got Savard. They ran it back. The Kucherov comes back immediately in game 1, and they are just fantastic. Yes, they did go 7 games with my New York Islanders, but this team was still an absolute wagon. I think this was the best version of the Tampa Bay Lightning because immediately after this, they lost that fantastic third line. They lost every single piece of that, and we're just never the same. I think that this was Tampa Bay just clicking on another level. Next up, the 2022 Colorado Avalanche. I'm going to go with an all-time team. Now, when looking at them, 119 points in the regular season. I understand the criticisms that their postseason run maybe is a little bit overrated. They went 16-4. I believe them and the 2012 Kings are the only teams to do that. But they did get lucky in the fact that the first round, they play the Predators, no UC Soros. Second round, Kadri goes into Binnington. St. Louis just falls apart with Ville Husso. Was it Ville Husso? I think it was Ville Husso. Ville Husso steps in. Yeah, I don't even remember. Yeah, it was Ville Husso. But he steps in and plays like shit. Then they play in the conference finals. They play an Edmonton team that just had a horrendous defensive core and Mike Smith in net. Evan Bouchard hadn't arrived. Ekholm obviously not there yet. And then in the Stanley Cup final, Braden Point deals with some injuries. But I still think when you look at the talent on this team, best defenseman in the entire NHL, second best player, second best center in the entire NHL. Landeskog, point per game, fantastic. Mikko Rantanen, one of the best right wingers in the entire NHL. On top of the depth that they had on this team, Kadri, Lehkonen, Nichushkin, so many goddamn names. Josh Manson, Taves still playing Taves was top 10 defenseman that year. They were fantastic. They were the best team since the 2013 Blackhawks, in my opinion. 2023 Vegas, I'm going to go good and got hot. I don't really think that this team jumps out that much to you. They were a very deep team, but again, they don't really have the superstar talent that some of these other teams have. Adin Hill and net, not that impressive. A well-worthy cup champion. Again, all these teams, I'm not trying to trash them. They're very worthy cup champions, but in terms of an all-time team, talking about these winners, can't quite put them there yet. Then lastly, we got the 2001 Colorado Avalanche. I think this also has to be an all-time team. You look at it, Sakic, Bourque, Hayduk. They got Rob Blake mid-season, Patty Waugh in net. Forsberg, this team was so good. Forsberg left. He ruptured his spleen in Game 7 against the Kings, I want to say, and they still won the next 2 rounds with him. They won without goddamn Peter Forsberg. This team was next level. Them and the 2002 Red Wings, fantastic. Some of the greatest teams of all time. And yeah, this would be my ranking. Let me know in the comments. What do you think about it? Let me move myself out of the way right here. I don't think this is too controversial for the most part. Let me know in the comments. What do you think? How would you rank these 21st century Cup champions? I'll be seeing the next one.